shot because there's a bit of a lag. And then we are going to discuss GLP-1 pens. It's not going to be too long of a live, probably 45 minutes max, depending on questions. And obviously, I'll go through topics. And then if anyone does have any questions, I'll go through them as much as possible. Now, if you bear with me, I'm just making sure this is live. Double check everything is okay. It is. Right. So GLP-1 pens, why am I keeping on going back to revisit them? I've actually just recorded a video where there's no interaction. It's just basically me going through GLP-1 pens, a few things that we need to go through. But the reason I'm bringing them back is the more and more I go onto YouTube, the more and more I see a lot of people who are not medically trained, and even those who are medically trained, going through these videos and talking about these medications as though they are innate, as though they do not have an effect on the human body. And when you actually put into principle all the things that this medication does, and when I think I've said in this other video, the fact that I actually don't really agree with the need for GLP-1 medications. Yes, they are unbelievable. However, have we got ourselves into a situation where we shouldn't really need them at all? And that sort of touched on another subject where I was thinking about, if I were to give medical advice maybe 70 years ago, or probably even sooner than that, maybe 50 years ago, how would I approach it differently? And we all go for protein, muscle mass, and all these other things. However, that probably wouldn't have been the case in that time period, because the diets and lifestyles were so much different that we probably wouldn't need the amount of muscle mass that we do to combat metabolic dysfunction. So in terms of a couple of things to go through, I'm not going to go through how they work in terms of too much detail, because unless someone actually goes and asks the question. However, one thing is that we are really good at starting GLP-1 medication. And I'm just going to go through what is GLP-1. Make sure I can see this on the screen. I can. So GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, it's a hormone. It's something that we naturally secrete. So when I always go on about the weight loss pen, it's not like it's this miracle drug in the sense that we don't have natural access to it. We do naturally produce this hormone. But when you are given the injection, you are increasing the levels by, I think it's about 1,000 times. I read it once in a couple of studies, and I cannot find that study again to say it was 1,000 times. But basically, we are increasing this level to such a high volume and amount within the blood that it is having such an unbelievable effect when it comes to insulin sensitivity, weight loss, and the control of type 2 diabetes mainly. And naturally, this hormone, testing out, is in the blood for about 1 to 2 minutes, is the usual half-life, meaning that after 1 to 2 minutes, a half-life then reduces its amount by 50%. And that is what happens with most medications. So if you are taking a medication on a daily basis as opposed to maybe weekly, the one on a daily basis is being cleared more quickly from the body. And that's what's happening with these GLP-1 medications. Now we are on Mounjaro, which is the brand name for tirzepatide, which is a combination of GLP-1 and GIP. But we are able to genetically and pharmacologically manufacture it, that we are getting the actions for about a week, hence why you only dose it on a weekly basis, because basically you are keeping a steady state. It stays within this range, which means that you are going to get an effect. In the very first part of any medication, it's not therapeutic, and if you go too much, then you are becoming toxic. But that's why they're going better. Apparently, there are GLP-1 medications in the pipeline where we are able to manufacture it for 1 month at a time. So you are injecting it 12 times a year, which is absolutely insane when you think about the just the advancements of how, when I was a child and family members would say, I wish I could find a drug that would lose weight without doing anything. These have come along and revolutionized the weight loss space so much. But that is what GLP-1 is. It's a natural hormone that's released by your gut. And the whole idea of it is to basically tell you, the rest of your body, that we have food coming in. Can we release some insulin? Can we store this energy? Can we prepare ourselves for all the other future processes that will happen? Now, We are very good at getting people on this medication. Now, depending on where you live in the country, the NHS, private, all them things out the window, is it's all based on your body mass index. Now, if yours is 30 and above, you basically have a green light to go on it. And if it's 27, but you have high blood pressure, you have high cholesterol, you have sleep apnea, you have a high risk of cardiovascular disease, you have type 2 diabetes, then you can also be put on the medication there. And it's been a bit, well, it's been relaxed a bit. It used to be 28 here. And years ago, when I used to do the dose titration with the very first weight loss approved GLP-1 pen, it was a bit more strict with dosing, whereas now, obviously, like, well, these are just my own opinions. It's that it's financially more lucrative to allow patients to be more lenient when you are dosing these types of medication. But the one thing I'm going to go on to is, when do you come off these medications? Now, everything that I talk about is not medical advice, it's informational purposes only. But we are very good at starting patients on them. We are not the best at bringing patients off. And that's probably for one of two reasons. One is simply there are no guidelines. And the next one is that patients do not want to come off it. And it's something that I will come on to later on in this live, is that we use weight loss, weight, aesthetics as the marker of health, the surrogate marker. However, it is probably one of the worst surrogate markers for health out there. And you can obtain a healthy weight, a healthy proportion without doing too much. And then that would basically warp your perception of what true health is. But when patients are on this medication and they are becoming healthier, which the majority will become healthier, by the way, I'm not disputing that fact. However, trying to get them off, there is no consensus. So practitioners are not really enforcing any rules, and patients don't know where to come off it. So if you go into a BMI classification scale, now bear in mind, BMI was never studied in women. It was mainly studied in middle-aged white men. So if you are not white, you basically will reduce your BMI limit by 2.5. So if you are 30 and above and you are obese, being a white person, then that would be about 27.5 for basically any other ethnic minority. And women, obviously, we adhere to the same BMI principles. However, it wasn't studied in women. So that's always something I bear in mind. But anyway, if you are classed as having a BMI of, I believe it is, depending on where it is, you look, it's about 18, I think it's actually 18.5. I haven't checked in a long time, all the way up to 24.9. When you then get to 25 and you go up to 29.9, this category is classed as overweight. This would be classed as normal weight. So common sense tells me that if you start to drop into the normal weight category, you should have been ideally adapting your diet and lifestyle at the same time. Then you should be able to start thinking about coming off the medication at this point. And I tell everyone, so for anyone who doesn't know, I'm a pharmacist, I prescribe medication, I monitor medication on a daily basis. I still have the same outlook for everyone, which is you do not want to be on a medication long term. And if you are, you want it to be on the lowest effective dose as possible, because everything in the universe has an equal and opposite reaction. So where we are increasing the amount of GLP-1 in the body, you are going to get the exact opposite happening in another reaction, and they will balance themselves out. That is basically the law of physics and the law of science in general. So I can see a few questions in it. By all means, I will come to some of them in a second. But yeah, so that's the first principle, is that we need to probably start coming off the medication once you are then achieving a healthy weight. Now, if you've adapted your lifestyle, because the licensing, if you ever look at any medication, it will tell you to take one a day, and it may give you some other guidance. So with some antibiotics, it may say take with food. If you do all them things, it is then optimizing your therapy. When you are taking GLP-1 medication, and I'm going to double check this because it used to be very, very strict. So I am on every medication, by the way. If you type in SPC, I always tell people to look at this. There are two forms, but you get a healthcare professional point of view and you get a patient's point of view. And that is called the Summary of Product Characteristics. So every manufacturer who makes a drug has to perform or produce one of these documents, and it has absolutely everything within it. It tells you how to dose it. It tells you every side effect that's ever been reported. It shows you all the clinical evidence. It tells you anything in terms of missed doses. It tells you about how to store it effectively. So that's what I'm going to have a quick look at now, because when I first started, it used to tell you that every time you are using a GLP-1 medication, you have to have this in conjunction with a hypocaloric diet. And I think it was, I want to say with exercise, I'm pretty sure they were the wording, or that was the wording. So obviously, if you are changing the composition of your diet and you are improving the amount of activity, when you are lowering your weight, you are basically adjusting to a new metabolic set point, because if you've got more muscle and less fat and a lower body weight, then your energy demands change completely. And a lot of people just keep doing the same things and wonder why, when they stop certain medications, so this one in particular, they rebound with a lot of weight. There's no Nobel Prize needed to figure out why that is the case. Now, the actual dosing on here does say, I'm just having a double check here, it tells you to take it weekly if needed, combination therapy. It actually doesn't really go into too much, to be honest. Should be taken if needed, dose increases. Well, I'm just going to have a quick look. I can't even see it where it's telling me to have it with a energy reduced diet or anything else. Let me have a quick look. Because when we first started, okay, it does. So for weight management, including weight loss and weight maintenance as an adjunct, meaning alongside, to a reduced calorie diet and increased physical activity. Okay, so it still stands, but I believe from the way I see it being prescribed, that is not being enforced as much as possible, because the amount of advice being given out on these things is very, very poor. So I'm going to look at a few of these questions. So, well, I've just answered the first one. What should you do in conjunction with these medications? You need to adopt a healthy lifestyle. Like I said, categorically, I don't believe 95% of the population should need to be on a GLP-1 medication. We've manufactured this issue ourselves. I don't need to be on it. I know a lot of people in my close family and circle that don't need to be on it because they are exercising, they are looking after their diets. And it's not easy. Don't get me wrong. I want to go out and eat certain foods. I don't want to exercise. I've just done a workout then. But life is hard. That is the bottom line. We just have to stop, how would I put it? We babysit too many people in the modern era in case if we hurt anyone's feelings, when in reality, we just have to be blunt to the point. Most people are overweight because they are not exercising enough. They are sedentary too much of the time and they are eating the wrong foods. And it does take willpower. A lot of people don't like that in this day and age, but it has to be said. What is the total cost if insurance doesn't cover it? So in the UK, insurance doesn't cover anything anyway. You've got to go privately, because the NHS, if you are, like I said then, your BMI needs to be greater than 30 or 27, depending on your ethnic origin. And if you are on the NHS, because obviously it's a very expensive medication, so on average, you are looking at 190, I think all the way up to about £300 a month. I'm not too familiar with it anymore because I don't do it privately, but in that region is what it's costing per patient. And give or take 3 to 4 years ago, a survey was done, and 26% of adults in the UK were classed as obese, meaning they would automatically get it. And then up to 48% of people were classed as overweight. So you could have nearly half the adult population being eligible for this medication, which, what is it in the UK at the moment? 70 million people, let's say 35 are adults. So you're looking at, give or take, 17 million people could be eligible to this monthly. Then obviously you're just going to have a massive burden. And then when you remove it, or pharmaceutical companies slide that scale in either direction, you are then going to have a highly dependent society on medication, when they could have just done the simple things that have happened many years before us. Now, I am not saying that is easy. As I said before, it needs a lot of willpower. However, it is something that we need to look into. A lot of people will probably stay on this medication. Ideally, I would say 3 to 4 months would be the sweet spot. However, a lot of patients stay on this 12 months plus. And how often will you have follow-up appointments to monitor my progress? If you get it privately, it should be every time you are getting a new prescription. However, that is not the case. And because it's largely done online, which there was a large clampdown on recently, then you are going to get a lot of prescriptions just being issued anyway. Let me see. At what point should I call you or consider stopping the medication due to side effects? That's a good question. So years ago, when I'm talking about years ago, the medication that I'm talking about that I first had clinics with was one called Saxenda, is the brand name for liraglutide. Now, this was a once daily injection. It had a weight loss from initial body weight over, I think it was 52 weeks anyway, give or take the 52 to 72 weeks, no matter what study you look at. It was about 8% of your body weight. Now, in comparison to modern GLP-1 with GIP, they are going towards 22.5%, and there are higher levels of weight loss after that point. But when I was using this medication, the side effects that you had to watch out for were nausea and vomiting. And if you couldn't tolerate the dose above, then you had to basically stop treatment. You couldn't have the same dose that you were on. And that has changed now, where you can basically stay on a dose that has given you a tolerable effect. So with that one, it's just a case of monitoring yourself and working out, is it worthwhile continuing if you are not tolerating the medication? But the one that mainly comes up, and this is the big one, is pancreatitis. Now, the way that you will normally, pancreatitis, inflammation of the pancreas, you will normally feel a severe, probably more central abdominal pain. It can radiate to the back, and it can be accompanied with nausea and vomiting, and it will be excruciating. And if you ever present with this and you are taking a GLP-1 medication, even if it's from the doctors or private, you should always make everyone aware of the fact that you are taking that anyway. You will more than likely be sent to A&E, probably be given painkillers, making sure that it's not gone into any bacterial or viral infection, whatever it is, and you will stop the medication. And technically, you should never go back on it because the risks are going to be really high. Should we do my baseline blood tests? You should always, before you go on this medication, it's always ideal to have a baseline set of blood tests anyway, because you can see what it is. But in terms of, do we dose adjust in renal, so kidney impairments, liver impairments, in mild cases, we don't really tend to change the dose at all. And you won't really get much evidence in patients who've got severe liver disease or severe kidney disease. But in them patients, you have to look at, is the risk outweighing the benefits? But always get your baseline bloods if you can. So, should we do bloods? Done that. Could any of my current medications interact with a GLP-1? Now, the way GLP-1 works is, so let's say this is your stomach, nice square stomach. This is your intestine, small intestine going this way. Now, GLP-1 can act on the stomach, and it can keep your food contents in there for a lot longer in time. So, I can't even think of. Normally, your stomach releases its contents every 5 minutes to 120 minutes. It's on a cycle, depending on where you are in that. And that can be increased greatly. So if you are taking oral medication, obviously it's going to go into here. Very little medication is absorbed through the stomach. Alcohol is one of them, believe it or not. That's why you should always line your stomach if you are drinking. But if that increases, let's say it goes up to 150 minutes, obviously you could potentially have 30 minutes where this medication is not in your system, and depending on what type of medication it is. So if it is something called a narrow therapeutic index drug, so I will come on to that in a second, narrow therapeutic index. If it's an oral contraceptive pill or HRT, that could also be impaired. They're the main ones that come up, and there's no real manufacturer's guidance on should you avoid taking the certain medications in time windows. It's just a case of, if you are on these, then you need to be more mindful of the absorption, which I will come on to what narrow therapeutic index drugs are. So in the large majority of cases, you don't really have to change anything when it comes to GLP-1 medication, apart from contraceptives and these types of drugs here, which are narrow therapeutic index. So what that means is, I actually touched upon it before. So if you've got a graph here, with any medication, you have this zone, which is called the safe zone. So anything above it is toxic, anything below it doesn't do anything. So it's like you taking, I don't know, instead of having a gram of paracetamol 4 times a day, it's like you taking 200 milligrams of paracetamol 4 times a day. It's probably not going to have much of an effect. So your blood levels are going to be around here. If you took 2 grams of paracetamol 4 times a day, your blood levels are probably going to be up here. So it's toxic. Narrow therapeutic index. So most drugs have a wide range. And as the title suggests, your range in a narrow therapeutic index is here. So you've got more scope to overshoot for toxicity or undershoot for a lack of effectiveness. So that's what it means. Common examples for anyone who wants to know. So you have ones such as the digoxin, which are for irregular heart rhythms. You also have methotrexate, which is mainly used for rheumatological conditions. You also can have it for inflammatory bowel disease. You can have lithium, which are usually used for mental health conditions such as bipolar disorder. You can have, there's absolutely tons, which you can have theophylline, actually quite rare now. Theophylline is used mainly for COPD and severe types of asthma. But all these types of drugs, and there are more, you will have to get the drug levels of these monitored if you are on a GLP-1 medication at the same time, because you will need to make sure that these are not going toxic or they are not under treating the condition that you are originally being seen for. But yeah, that was a good question, because a lot of people don't look at that. If you are a female, by the way, and you are on HRT, I've already touched on contraception. If you are using contraception and you are taking a GLP-1 medication, one is you should look at the type of contraception that you're using. If it is an oral combined pill, then your levels are going to be lower potentially because of the delayed absorption. So you may need to use other methods at the same time. So you will need to potentially add on a barrier method throughout the whole time that you are using it, or you may need to go and have the coil inserted because they are locally acting and it doesn't really affect your contraception that way. When it comes to HRT, so this is something that's normally missed, and it is ironically the biggest, I would say probably the most popular cohort when it comes to GLP-1 medication are women in their, I would say 48 to, what do I commonly see? 48 to 58, I would say, is the most common group of users for GLP-1 medication. That is slowly expanding. There are a lot more younger people using it, and believe it or not, a lot of people in the 60s and 70s. But my point is, if you are taking HRT, you have two components to HRT. I understand there's probably not many women on here, but you have, I will draw it out so you can see. And you can, or if you don't take HRT, you can refer to someone who does. So HRT has two components usually if you have a uterus in and you've not had a hysterectomy. So you've got estrogen and you have progesterone. So if you have estrogen without progesterone, you have your lining of your uterus builds up and it keeps increasing and then can lead to endometrial cancers. That is why we need this component if you've not had a hysterectomy. Now, when you have a GLP-1 medication at the same time, it then basically reduces the effectiveness of your progesterone. So if you've just had a dose increase or you've just started on a GLP-1 medication, the guidance is that you should ideally double this. So times that by 2 for about 4 weeks. Now, obviously, this is not medical advice. You should always seek your practitioner, your provider. But this, if you are taking HRT, you can actually all look this up in the British Menopausal Society. They're the only people who've got the guidelines out. And it's just that if you increase it double for 4 weeks, it is then providing your endometrial lining with a greater amount of cover and reducing the chance that you have cancer as a result, basically. Because there was quite a lot of people who take this and I've had a lot of adverse effects going for ultrasounds because of endometrial thickening. Okay, so let me have a quick one. Is this medication a daily pill or a weekly injection? So, oh yeah, one other medication that you should not be taking when you are on a GLP-1 medication is one called Orlistat. So the brand name, not the best with brands, I think it's Xenical. So it used to, and the other brand name which you can actually buy over the counter, which is half the strength, is called Ali. You may know it, it's a big blue pill, and you take that along with your meals. But if you are on this and you start a GLP-1 medication, then you should ideally not be on this anymore because the GLP-1 will be suffice and you will have probably the worst side effects known to man when it comes to nausea and vomiting and diarrhea, because this coupled with a GLP-1 medication is basically going to keep you on the toilet and you probably won't be absorbing any nutrients at the same time. So this should be picked up. It should be on any form if you are going through online pharmacies, which I don't know, do I agree with? I agree with having access, but I think that these need to have a lot more counselling with them and you need to have a bit more safeguarding because they are being highly abused by patients. So Next one, yeah, so is this a daily pill or a weekly injection? So Saxenda, which is the brand name for liraglutide, is a daily injection, once a day. That is a once a day injection. All these injections that I'm going to say are something called subcutaneous. So if this is the top of your skin, you obviously have the epidermis, the dermis, and then you have, so it's basically going into this area here. Below, you will have muscle, but it's not going into the muscle. It's going into this compartment, and then that will go into your system from there. So that's how it works. It bypasses the liver. And the reason we do that is because it is a protein, it's a peptide. And if you do peptides orally at this moment in time, until we figure out a way to do it, hence why insulin is given it this way, is that the stomach acid basically breaks down the protein, the peptide, and it doesn't have any function once that's happened. So Saxenda's once a day, and then you've got Wegovy. I'm only talking about these in the context of weight loss because Wegovy is semaglutide, if I can spell it, semaglutide. As to is Ozempic, but Ozempic is the diabetic licensing, whereas Wegovy is the weight loss. Then we have, I've just done the generic name, which is the drug name. So tirzepatide, which is Mounjaro. And these are weekly, which is obviously changing the game because 4 injections a month to lose, well, this one loses about 15 to 16% of your original body weight, and this one about 22 to 23. That is absolutely insane. Without you doing a thing, really, you are losing a substantial amount of weight, which you would have not thought possible many years ago. Now, that brings me on to, before I look at any more questions, obviously if you've got them, fire away, but it brings me on to this new class that's sort of taking the market by storm, taking the internet by storm, peptides. It's basically a very, very nice blanket, how would you put it, umbrella term for injectable drugs. And a peptide I haven't actually looked into them, I will concede to that. I've not looked into them in the sense that I haven't looked at all these like BPC 157 and all the effects of them. But from a basic scientific point of view, a protein is made up of all these things linked in a certain way to give a shape, like a key goes into a lock. If you have, let's use the key to the lock analogy. So if I give you all a clump of steel and I say make a key, the clump of steel is the amino acids and the peptides, but then in order to have a greater function in a particular lock, it needs to have the specific configuration, which is what happens when you are a protein. It folds in a certain way with all these bonds to make it have the function it has in the body. Now, when we are given peptides, they are basically small chains that eventually fold into a protein. So the idea and the theory behind it is that if you give the body peptides and giving the body the raw materials it needs, then it is more likely to produce the proteins that we need and then have the beneficial outcomes that we are having. However, like I said before, they are injected. So with any injectable drug, medication, you come with the risks of local infections because you are injecting into the skin, you are piercing the skin, you are causing an inflammatory response. Yes, more often than not, it is not of a large concern, but that is something to bear in mind. There is also the chance that people can misinject. So instead of it going into certain compartments, they could go straight into a vein. They could leave an air bubble. There are so many things that could happen as a result of this. And I feel as though because it's got a fancy name, peptides, you sort of you dissociate the fact that it is an injectable drug. And GLP-1 pens are peptides. The one that is the most common peptide is retatrutide. Now, actually looking at the data, it's not licensed in the UK at the moment, as far as I'm aware. So it's not licensed. So when you are coming to use this, it's normally from a foreign market. It's not got the same rigorous testing, and people are happy to inject this into their body to maybe maintain a lower body mass, which obviously everyone has their own autonomy. However, it is not something I would be doing. It's not something I've ever have done. And it's something I would advise to err on the side of caution, is because, like I said, When you inject medication, you bypass the liver, which is the body's natural first defense of any foreign agent that comes into the body. And they're not regulated at this moment in time. And the weight loss, from what I've seen, is very similar to Manjaro. I think it's about 23%, which is very, like I said, it's very similar. But the only difference with this is they come in little vials. You have to obviously withdraw from the vial, and then you need to inject that. So there's obviously a chance of you transferring bacteria here. There's the chance that you pierce the skin with obviously a needle. I'm not the best at this today. With a needle causing an inflammatory response here and transferring bacteria. There's so many things that can go wrong with it. And if you don't need to be on them, then I would advise not to be on them. But I'm not saying that they are inherently bad. They may have really good qualities. But then that also poses the question of, are we living, have we made this issue up again for ourselves where we have to then, because our life is so poorly adapted in the sense that we are largely sedentary, we don't have much social interaction, our diets are becoming more processed than ever. Even when we try not to, it's covered in pesticides, they are covered in filler oils, all these other things that are happening, that we need to go above and beyond and give ourselves these extra ordinary treatments to just have a normal function, or maybe have the function that we should have had maybe 30 years ago if we would have adopted the same lifestyle, but the environment's obviously a lot different. So if you are going to do peptides, try and have someone who has a really good scientific base, because it's okay reading a few studies, but if you've never really been in medicine and you're not really involved within that market, then I just don't feel like it's a safe environment to do so. And if it goes wrong, what are you going to do? Do you have hydrocortisone injections on site in case you have certain reactions? Have you got EpiPens? All these other things that could potentially go wrong. I'm not trying to scaremonger. I just want people to be informed that these are injectable drugs. At the end of the day, it's just got a fancy umbrella term, peptides, where it just basically warps our perception of what it actually is and the fact that we are injecting these drugs into our body. So let me have a quick look. Is this medication a daily pill? Done that one. Which GLP-1 do you recommend for me and why? When it comes to recommending, again, I find it a very, very tricky situation or sticky situation, because I feel as though you can get down to a healthy weight. And that's what I wanted to come onto actually, because we use weight as the marker of health. So if someone is, sorry about these Jordans, but if someone goes from there to that is considered more healthy. And in the large majority of cases, that is true, because this person will have a lower stress on the joints, on the musculoskeletal system. They probably have reduced fat, they have greater insulin sensitivity, they have greater mobility, probably greater mental health because they don't look a certain way. There's so many benefits to being a smaller version of yourself in a large majority of cases. But a few things that need to be brought in is that if you have, let's say, 100, if you're 150 kilos on the left, you're 150 kilos here, and you have, let's say, 100 kilos of fat and 50 kilos of lean. Now, lean obviously is not just muscle, it's bone, it's potentially organs, water, other things. But if you then go down to, let's say, 100 kilograms, still not ideal in my opinion, obviously depending on height and your proportion. But let's say you've dropped 50 kilograms. However, the fat only went down by, let's do this reasonable. So your lean mass is now 30 kilograms and your fat is going to be 70. So you've lost a lot of lean mass there, and it's a large proportion of what you are. Basically, the most beneficial aspects of anyone's body is the metabolically active tissue, the lean mass. Fat doesn't really have much of an issue or a purpose in the modern era, because we do not need to store energy in the large amounts that we used to. Because, like I said, if I'm hungry now, I am fortunate enough that we live in an era that I can go into the fridge and make some food. I don't have to worry about, well, I might not have food for a good 48 hours. So whatever food that does come into my body, I need to store just in case I need to use it for catching some food or to go and hike somewhere. That's not the issue anymore. So When it comes to health, don't just focus on weight, focus on the fact of, are you increasing your mobility? And when I mean mobility, I mean functionality. Can you lift your body weight? Can you get up and down and squat? Can you do a jog, walk a long distance? They're all the things you need to be looking at. Can you have, how would you put it? It's quite hard for me to summarize this so quickly, but when you just lose weight, you are literally just looking at one metric. And if someone is a lot less in weight and they do not have the right amount of nutrients and minerals, then in my opinion, that's probably unhealthier than probably where you started in the first place. So in terms of which one would I recommend, I probably wouldn't recommend any without you first trying the approach that I believe everyone should be doing, which is removing ultra processed foods to a great degree, exercising on a daily basis, exercising a bit more discipline. And then if it's not working for you at the rate that you probably need it to be to improve your health, then you could potentially go and have a consultation. The most effective is Manjaro, which, like I said, it's once a week. If you use that alongside all the things I've just said and then come off it maybe in 3 months' time, that is a good use of the medication because you've gained health by doing so. But if you then don't change anything, go on it, get to the weight you want to be, look how you want in clothes, and you don't do anything else going forward, then I feel like you are running the risk of becoming unhealthier. What are the differences between oral and injectable weight loss medications, if any? There are. So in terms of effectiveness, I mean, the two main ones, so obviously you've got GLP-1 medication or your main injectable, and then the main oral medication that you have for weight loss is all the stats that I said before. Now, there's loads of differences between these, how they work, the effectiveness. So effectiveness, I'm going to go off Manjaro for this one, and then Orlistat is Orlistat. So you can lose about 22.5% of your original body weight in about, I think the study says 72 weeks. Now, the same weight loss metric in Orlistat is about 2.5%, I believe, last time I looked. It is not that high. How it works is that GLP-1 mimics the same hormone that you've got in your body, but it does it to such a larger degree, really. So it's about 1,000 times more potent. And GLP-1s work in so many different ways. So they reduce the amount, so they delay, I don't need the arrow there. So they delay gastric emptying, which is delaying the release of food from your stomach. By doing so, it makes you feel fuller, and it also gives your body more time to process the food that's already within the intestine and trying to be absorbed. It also works on a couple of neurons within the brain, within the hypothalamus, which are basically your feeding centers. And the way it does this is it's very powerful, basically. So if you actually look into the studies, if you want in more detail, they've done it with rats, and they starved a group of rats, put a lot of food in front of them, and even when they were starving, they still didn't want to eat because they were suppressing the neurons within the hypothalamus. So you can see how potent this medication is. So hypothalamus, I think from memory, it's the arcuate nucleus, and there are a couple of neurons that it stimulates and inhibits, which then decrease appetite, they increase energy expenditure, and that is the main way. Now, Orlistat, the way that works, it's called a lipase inhibitor. So when you eat fat in your diet, goes into your intestine, which I'm drawing here. It's quite hard for me to hold this against. So this is your intestine, the lumen of it, the inside. When fat comes in, it needs to be broken up into these little globules to then be basically absorbed across the membrane into your body. Now, the way that this is broken up is by these little enzymes, little scissors called lipases. Now, Orlistat blocks 33% of these. And by reducing the fact that this is getting broken down, you have a reduction in the amount of fat that you've absorbed. Now you can sort of see where the pitfall is here, is that if you don't have much fat in your diet, then it's not going to have that big of an influence on there, because if you don't have much fat in your diet, it can't really block the absorption of any fat. And if you do have a lot of fat in your diet, then it's going to block 33% of that being absorbed. And what that means is that fat keeps on going through your intestine, will end up in your stools, And a lot of people, if they do not change their lifestyle, because it sort of acts as a deterrent, you will be on the toilet more often than not. So that's the way it works. This is a lot cheaper. Obviously, cost is not even in the question. This is so much cheaper. And this one just has the greatest effects. As you can see, 22 to about 2.5%. This is the one that's going to make you lose the weight the most. But like I said, you are going to lose other weight at the same time. You're going to lose muscle mass. And if you are just focusing on weight, then you won't really improve your health going forward. So that is the only issue. That's one of the issues I have on these, is that it just blinds people into the fact that being a skinnier version of themselves is always the best way. But when you are having these medications, you need to make sure that whatever you do eat, which is going to be very little in some people, is balanced. You have enough vitamins and minerals, because you're not going to get enough of them. So, does GLP-1 help or do anything for mental health? I think the only way that you would see the cross comparison between GLP-1s and mental health is the fact that you are going to look a lot better aesthetically, because you're going to be carrying a lot less fat, and that's where people see the benefits mentally. Should you use GLP-1 if you're 5'9" male, 33, 16 stone, and struggling dropping the last 2 stone? Can I get it? So 16 stone of 5'9" is obviously a higher BMI, but again, like I said, I would always focus on the fact of what is your fat mass, what is your lean mass. For context, I am 5'10". People are probably going to laugh saying, oh, you're 5'9" and a bit. I'm 5'10". I weigh 78 kilos, 79 kilos. Body fat's usually, it's probably a bit higher now, it's probably 11%, but that's where I normally sit, probably a bit less. So I would always be aiming for any man, is aiming for a body fat percentage. I think men should aim for a body fat percentage of between, I would say, 12 to 16% is probably where most men should try and aim for. That is not where most men are. Most men are probably north of 22%. But you should be aiming for about here, and you should be trying to probably put a lot less weight on your body frame. So I used to be a bit heavier, same body fat, but a bit heavier, which was good functionality, but I feel as though the skeleton can only handle so much. So if you can reduce the amount of weight on your frame, that's always going to be best for you. But in terms of should you use a GLP-1, it's the same thing. If you want to, it's like if you just lost someone close to you and you turn to alcohol as a way of coping, a coping mechanism. In some people, that may help for like the first couple of days, just maybe a whiskey or a beer might calm the nerves down and make them sort of go to sleep and get a better quality of life for them next few weeks. And then if they stop it after that point, then that was a good use of alcohol, if there is any good use of alcohol, if you see what I'm saying. So if you're going to do GLP-1 medications and it's right for you and you are eligible to have it, and you're going to use it in the sense of, I will improve my health at the same time and come off it, then that's a good use of it. But if you're not going to do that, and then you're just going to basically let the weight drop off without any involvement, you could be eventually leading to other disorders, osteoporosis, because you're not having any weight training or any mass on the bones. And then you will then be basically at the mercy of any pharmaceutical company. If they change the price, what are you going to do? Because if you've not adapted your lifestyle, then you're basically led by them. And if they put it up to £500, £600 a month, in America it went up to $1,000 a month, I think. That's why ours eventually did go up in the UK, because it was not fair. So it depends on how you use it, and that's with a lot of things in life. If you're using it as a tool to get you to that place quicker and you have no intention of staying on it for a long term, then I feel like that's a good use of that medication. Now, that is all the questions I've got at the moment. I don't think I've missed any. I am on here for probably another 5 or so minutes if anyone wants to ask any questions, and I will leave it open for a couple of minutes. But that's the issue I have with GLP-1s, is I see it all the time. I probably spend 5-10 minutes of my clinics each day adding onto records patients having a private GLP-1 medication, which, fair enough, like I said, use it correctly, but I feel like we just overlook the fact that we shouldn't be really getting to that situation in the large majority of patients. in the first place. Okay. What's ironic is anyone I know who takes a GLP-1 tends to lead a sedentary lifestyle. What will be the long-term side effects considering most people can be addicted? Good question. And there was a study done by the BBC, and it was it was a study done by the BMJ, British Medical Journal, and it was released by the BBC, and it was basically saying that patients or users of GLP-1 medications regain their weight 4.2 times quicker than someone who diets naturally and then doesn't adhere to certain lifestyle changes going forward. But the issue is for me is that, again, unless it's proven, and I'm proven wrong, but the fact is that a lot of people, like you've just said there, are not changing their lifestyle. So if you are, let's say you're 20 stone and you've got there by having 5,000 calories a day, you drink a lot of alcohol, you don't do any exercise, you don't do any weight training, you do nothing, and you take an injection that's taking you from 20 stone all the way down to, let's say, 16, 15 stone, then your metabolism, your basal metabolic rate will have decreased. Your energy demands, again, has all decreased because you've lost the muscle, you've lost lean mass. So when you then carry on the same things, which a lot of people do, they try and eat as much as they can, continue the same lifestyle. When they stop that treatment, it's not that the medications cause them to put it on, it's just that they've adhered to the same lifestyle that was putting them at 20 stone, but now they're down to 15. So they're going to have a massive increase and the rate of which they put back on weight. In terms of side effects, we don't have the long-term data for them. So Saxenda, which is the first one, was released in 2012, but it didn't really have a large amount of people on it. And these ones, the Monjaro, I actually don't know when it was released. I want to say it was 2018. I'm going to try and find out when it was. But basically, when these come back over the next 10, 15 years, I think the biggest issues that we're going to see with these. So I said to my partner that weight rebound will be, or regain, if I can speak, will be very bad because of the way it works. So one of the things, so let's say this is your brain. So your brain, you have so many different layers of how to control appetite. So the first control of your appetite, or one of the first, is the fact that if you've got too much food in your stomach and you can't put any more in, that's your body saying potentially we shouldn't eat anymore, but it's still gotten into your mouth. Basically, it should have been further up. The next one, which is a bit longer, is about your energy stores, mainly relating to fat. So this is your brain. There's a big B, and let's say this is fat. Let's say it's fat around your stomach. We can see it, it's visible. Now, what this does is this releases a hormone called leptin. And leptin basically feeds back to the brain. And it says if there are high levels of leptin, it means that we've got a lot of energy stored, because that makes sense, because fat is the greatest store of energy that we've got. So you can see what's going to happen here is because this is a very, very strong process when it comes to regulating your appetite and other things. So if you then have a reduction in fat, so let's say we reduce the fat down to here, your leptin is going to go down so much, and your brain is then going to think, we've lost so much energy here, we're at risk of being starved, because obviously we haven't really evolved that much since the time when energy abundance wasn't a thing. That's only in the last 20, 30 years. So then what your brain does then, it increases your appetite and basically wants you to feed. So that is basically why regain of weight is so abrupt and quick when people don't adapt a new lifestyle. So that was the one thing I did say. But a lot of things that I think will come out is because a lot of people aren't having balanced diets, because you'll speak to someone, you'll speak to a patient, and they'll go, oh yeah, well, I've only had a coffee today and a piece of toast. In what planet is having a coffee and a piece of toast a healthy, balanced diet? Where are you getting all your vitamins and minerals? Where are you getting your protein intake? Where are you getting your fiber? It is not healthy. So I think you're going to find a lot of conditions where people have got a lot of vitamin and mineral deficiencies. I think the biggest one that comes to mind for two factors is osteoporosis. And the reason I say this one is obviously the poor osteoporosis, can't spell sideways. And that is because you're getting a lack of vitamins in the diet and minerals. So vitamins, calcium, all the other things. But you are having a reduction in activity. And this is because the people usually taking them have never been active in the first place. And when you are reducing the amount of energy that you are intaking, that you are eating, or the intake of energy, then you are going to have a reduction in energy in general. So you're going to feel more lethargic. And when you are not doing activity, you are not weight bearing. So weight training is the best one. But if you're not loading the bones with any weight, they are not building, they're not remodeling. So I feel as though osteoporosis is going to be a massive thing that comes out, especially in the cohorts that I see. It's normally in postmenopausal women because estrogen's dropped, which increases your risk anyway. But the fact that they're gaining a lot of weight due to a lack of estrogen is putting more of them patients on the treatments for GLP-1 medications. So I feel as though mineral and vitamin deficiencies, you're going to see a lot of people with osteoporosis, I think, weight regain when they aren't able to afford certain things. And I just feel like you're going to find a very, very metabolically unhealthy population because we've completely been, or they've been misguided by what is health. Good question, but that's what I see anyway. And the first part of that sadly comes through, like I said, with that study on the weight regain, if I can speak. So, yes, like I said at the very beginning of the video, I wanted to bring it up because please, if you are thinking about going on them, make sure you do your own research. Make sure you have a proper consultation because you can go online and do a doctor's consultation where there is no face-to-face. You put in your own metrics and sadly it gets authorized because you've reached a certain criteria, which I don't agree with. I feel like these medications need to come with actual implementable advice when it comes to weight training, when it comes to diet. Very few people know about that within the medical and health space, and that's what I try and do with my patients is if they are on something, don't just say lose weight and eat a better diet. Give them tangible things that they can do. So we want to reduce the amount of saturated fat in your diet. Maybe let's change your butter to hummus. Let's try and reduce the amount of ultra processed packaged food that you're having because that's going to be low in fiber, high in saturated fat, high in oils. Pardon me. So it's giving people the right advice, and sadly that's not happening. And it's a twofold way. I've done a couple of reviews with patients. It's not all on the healthcare professional to do it. It's obviously we live in an area where, or an era, sorry, where patients have autonomy and they should do. It's their health, it's their body. But when you try and do a consultation with some of them, they just don't want to know and they want the medication, which then makes safe prescribing and safe use of medication a very difficult thing. And when you've got other people on the internet looking very well and fit and not advertising, but probably exploiting the fact that they are taking these types of medications, it is then leading other people into, well, they're doing it, why should I? And it does wind me up sometimes, I'm not going to lie. A lot of people say it doesn't wind them up, but when you're doing things, the hard things every day, putting your diet first, you're working all these hours and you're doing everything exercise. I've just done a leg workout before I come on here with a decent amount of weight. That was probably the last thing I wanted to do, leg workout before, after I've just finished a full day of clinic to then come and try and grow an online community and business. So when you see people just getting the results of something, but I try and put that to the side of me when people are actively engaged in improving their health because that is what I always want. Regardless of if we agree on how to get there, if we agree on the fact that we need to improve our health, then that's something that I can sort of put to the side and sort of get past and we sort of work together to get to that goal. But yeah, I just feel like it's a highly exploited area at the moment and it's sad because people who aren't in that space. I shared one of your shorts to someone who was on a GLP-1 because I was concerned about the lack of physical activity, considering the scrubs. I know. When we bought them, we were thinking, are we going to use them? Because Jess, my wife partner, she also bought them at the same time. But I feel like it's a good use of money. But genuinely, that isn't just me scaremongering. I wish I could actually show the clinics that I have. Obviously, it's confidential, so I can't. But the amount of patients that I see who are having side effects due to them and the reluctance to stop them. So, like I said, pancreatitis is a no-go. Once you've had that, you should not be going back onto that medication. But patients will be like, well, I want to go back on it because I was doing really good from an aesthetic point of view. And yeah, please do not put aesthetics first. When it comes to, you just need to really do the basics. And going on to physical activity and protein as well, by the way, that's one way in which we preserve lean mass. I was thinking about this earlier, and I said at the very beginning of this live, is that probably 100 years ago, to be even my build, I'm not really muscly. I'm probably high average, if you want to put it that way. But my physique maybe 80 years ago was probably not sustainable because I've got too much metabolically active tissue in a time where we don't have enough energy. And the body doesn't actually want to have a lot of muscle because it's very, very expensive to have muscle on the body in any way. So to consider the fact that 90% of my body, or yeah, 90% of my body at the moment, and the majority of the time, is lean mass, you can see how it's using energy ineffectively. But we have to do that now in the modern era because, like I said at the beginning, I'm sedentary for 8 hours a day. I am eating foods where even when I'm trying to do very well with ultra processed, they will have oils in them. They will have hidden chemicals sometimes when you go into the airport. And there's so many things that you've got to watch out for that we need to combat it in a way that's more extreme than ever, which is in this case having a higher muscle mass, which, like I said, probably wouldn't have been the advice that I gave out such a long time ago, because I do feel as though everything does have an equal and opposite reaction. So having too much muscle mass, it's putting more weight onto the frame of the body, and is that going to lead to poor outcomes in the future? I feel like my generation, so I'm 31, is the generation, so I'd say probably my age to about 36-year-olds, maybe up to 40. They're the generation that really done gym, weightlifting on a regular basis. So maybe in 20, 30 years' time, we will be able to see the effects of what this type of training and lifestyle has done for our health going forward. Is having a higher proportion of your body as muscle mass really that beneficial, even if it's a low body fat and you're still above a certain weight on your frame? But thank you very much for joining. I may not be doing a live for the next 2 weeks. I have done a recording. I've actually done another GLP-1 medication sort of video for next Monday, or the Monday after. I'll put it up, probably give it a bit of a space between this one. So it may not be applicable for some of you if you've watched this. And I've done a video on how to break down your cholesterol results, because I've had quite a few people come up to me and say, I've had this at the GP. I don't know what it means. They've not given me a call because it says normal or borderline high. So I went through it quickly, how to read them, what they mean, a bit more context to them to allow you to individualize it for yourself. And then I've also attached on the video a free guide, and it genuinely is free. It's not like me getting you in and then, oh, you've got to get this. It's a genuine free guide. It's on WAP, so you can actually download it now, I think. No, I don't think it's available yet, but I'll put the link in, and it will allow you to look at your results in more detail. Again, it's not medical advice, but it's probably a lot better than what you've got access to at the moment. But as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will try and catch you. The next live will probably be the end of May, because we've got a bit of traveling and a few other things, hence why I've made the videos in between. So yeah, I'll probably catch you at some point when I'm free. If you've watched this video, thank you very much. It's not medical advice, it's informational purposes only, as always, and I will see you in the next one.